be the script writer for what we're doing.
Okay.
And Ty is our expert director, and he'd be playing a role, and I'd just get to ask questions and provide some critique along the way.
Producer, director, writer.
Yeah, well, yeah,
That's the team.
And Joe, you and Dan probably together have more knowledge of our most recent 30 years than anybody. And we will, with time limits we might be under, a couple hours, get as much as we can. And if you think of something later on, and I know you'll think of something later on, you'll be getting ready to take a nap or something, you say, I should have told him such and such. Just give us a call. We'll come back and do some more.
Yeah.
And in all likelihood, Ty may come back later. And
there's a lot of history and tradition. They're kind of, and some things that were tradition proved to still be good today. Knowing history, where something started, where something still
hugely
today.
Important. Hugely important.
Well, Coca-Cola Company's a good example of that. 100-year-old product. And decided to change it, and then that didn't work.
Is it a tradition, or is it a fact or fiction that at 5 Points somebody ordered had a headache and ordered this Coke thing, and
it was good for your stomach.
The guy, instead of putting regular water in it, put carbonated water in it, and that's the origin of Coca-Cola.
Well, it's a pharmaceutical.
It was a pharmacy.
Medicinal type, yeah.
That's what I heard.
I'll tell you a small story. Do you know where the pharmacist was?
Where it was? 5 Points, right at the point of that big blue building.
Pardon?
Candler Building?
No, actually was from Auburn University. Was worked at Toomer's Corner, that drugstore. Auburn invented Coca-Cola.
Now I heard it was at 5 Points.
No, he was. I'm talking about where he came from.
Oh, where it came from. Okay, yeah, well, Auburn, yeah.
That was Asa Candler, or who was the pharmacist?
I don't remember.
It wasn't Venable, right? I don't think it was. I don't think it was, but
I'll tell you that in 1985, when they not only they replaced the Coke, they didn't add a new Coke. They replaced the original Coke. That was the mistake.
Tell me about it.
And I asked John Brock. You invited me to the Chairman's Club right about 2 years ago before we retired. John Brock came, Coca-Cola International. And he went through the international markets, how you marketed the Italians and the French different, and all the new products. And I went up afterwards, several of us did. And I said, your comments were very interesting and informative. I said, but I got one question. I said, in light of what happened with the original Coke back in the mid-'80s, today, what's the future of the original Coke? And he looked at me and he didn't say anything for a minute and said, I thought he was going to say we're going to keep producing it and add all the other stuff to it. That's the way you can't need it too.
Seems to be logical to me.
And he said, mister, that is a real good question.
Ooh.
That is the answer I got from John Brock, the president of Coke Internet. So I wondered, are they still told, what did we do wrong? Pepsi generation, that was working, the taste test.
Coca-Cola tell me that they had all of the research to back that up.
Yeah, it was Mike Kamey who screwed them up, the consultant.
Was it?
Yeah, he's the one
and the guy who was the president, what was his name?
Oh, Gonzalez from Cuba.
That's right.
Now, what did the new Coke,
he got all
the new Coke was going to be sweeter? Wonder where the sugar was coming from.
And it was going to be more like Pepsi.
Yeah. Cuba.
And there were those of us who took it personal.
Well, anyway.
Dave's anxious to get started.
Yeah, well, I don't want to keep anybody too late. Joe, let's start out. Would you mind sitting? I get, when I'm talking, it's just one of those things.
Yes,
Father. If you say something you think, I shouldn't have said that, let's be sure it's not recorded.
Okay.
We're recording everything said. So you can give us instructions as you move along. And if you think of something halfway through that really went in what you said earlier, we'll just go back to it. Very informal. You're going to be looking at me, and it's just like you and I are sitting at the bank, and I'm on the couch, and you're on the couch, and we're just talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get done with this whole thing, if you want the rough, several people have asked this rough interview for your grandkids and whatever, future grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to just, again, try to make it as casual as possible. And Ty's recording it, and just like that trailer showed, it's going to be high quality. You'll be proud to be a part of it.
Well, I'm going to start where the county really made a big change. Where the beginning of what I thought.
Just be looking at me.
Okay, I think the person that made the first big impact on Georgia and the Southeast was Lucius Clay in choosing Rickenbacker Field for the Bell Bomber plant. And I was 1 year old. I was born in 1941. And they use automobile company people because that's where the assembly line. In other words, Henry Ford got a lot of credit when they were doing some history of certain things, that he really was the master of the assembly line. So a lot of the car companies started manufacturing aircraft. Ford manufactured B-24 Liberator, and I got a picture in an old Air Force history book with Hap Arnold, who was over the Army Air Corps, and Henry Ford. And they talk about his assembly plants and how they were going to convert them to aviation and military equipment. Well, in 1942, my dad, having an automobile experience, went to work for Bell. So my second Christmas, Daddy was in Buffalo, New York for the whole winter, training at Bell Aircraft. And so I didn't know really what was going on at that time, but General Clay pinpointed the spot. He also later was engineered the Berlin airlift, and that led to we need more cargo planes. That was the birth of the C-130 to do airlift, and Lockheed won that contract in 1953, 54.
Do you know, Joe, why he chose Cobb County to put that plant?
Well, he's from Cobb County, for one.
Well, that's good.
And Metro Atlanta, you had an airport there, and it was you built defense plants within the country where they weren't as accessible to the coast for bombing and those sorts of things. And so that employed about 30,000 people. And as George Berry knows very well, that's really where mechanization and manufacturing started in the South, was there in Marietta. And of course that enhanced the Atlanta airport as well, but it made it. Excuse me.
No, I'm sorry, excuse me. I thought you were saying my bad. You may find this interesting, Joe, for what it's worth, because you do have more trivia about stuff than anybody. One thing I learned real interesting in this chamber job 8 years ago when I got on board and I had responsibility for economic development. With a lot of companies, you know what the most important factor is, or factors to decide where you're going to locate?
People.
Say you get it down to Atlanta, Georgia. What do you think?
Well, it's either people, education, work ethic.
You would think so, but actually they want to be located very close to really nice golf courses. Mm-hmm. And the other part of it is their wife has to like it. Those two factors are how the radar screen.
We had the Merida Country Club.
Yeah, that's right.
1915.
That's right. And he was from Cobb County. That stuff important to people locally gets a bigger part of decisions than people would
Well, some of the things that happened in Cobb by Lucius Clay interacted with us nationally as well, because during World War II, he and Eisenhower were very familiar with Germany. And so, of course, he did the Berlin airlift. Then when Eisenhower became president, because of his knowledge of the Autobahn system in Germany, that was the pattern for the interstate system in Georgia, or in the country. So he hired Lucius Clay, was one of the main engineers or consultants to lay out the interstate system in the United States. And it was based on the Autobahn system in Germany. So we got that idea from Hitler, along with the Saturn rocket and Redstone Arsenal, and Werner von Braun, who was brought over from Germany. But that was the big thing, and the bridges were built so that a flatbed and a tank could go under all the bridges on the interstate. And it was totally funded by defense and transportation. There was no bonds, no loans. They just funded it out of the treasury as defense and transportation. So that was a big lick for Cobb County and for the state of Georgia as well. And then when, after World War II, when they reopened the plant, and the word got out, see, when it was Beryl Aircraft, we had wells. We didn't have a water authority. We had to pump water from Atlanta, or they did, for the Bell Aircraft. But once it was known that Lockheed was going to reopen the plant, that's what birthed the Cobb Area Water System Authority, which is now one of the leading water authorities in the country, and especially the Southeast.
Who was the chairman at that time?
Chairman of
County.
I think it was J.J. Daniel. He had some. Roy said that.
Yeah.
I know who, when they converted the plant in '51, was Foster Yancey, who was president of the chamber at that time.
Yeah. So Ernest Barrett, he had a role in the water sewer system in Cobb.
Yeah, Ernest came along and was elected in 1964 and took office in January of '65. That's when you had your 5-person commission. And when they took over in '64, the county was on the warrant system. They were actually broke, and C.W. Matthews did a lot of work. That came out when we had all the former commissioners. I don't know if you were in that lunch. Mm-hmm. We had all the former chamber presidents. We had all the former commissioners.
I was chair of the chamber that year.
Yeah, both of them, yeah. Mm-hmm. And Coach Johnny came and spoke. But that was, Ernest came on, and I know they talked about, Harry Ingram talked about, them getting credit, Sid and Matthews, till they got some money. Because they were on the warrant system. That's why they had to change the state law in '63 to allow the Cobb School District to spend money beyond the 12th grade. That was the only way they're going to be able to fund a new junior college, because nobody else had any money. Meredith had a little bit of body capacity, but the county school district had to come up with $1.9 million to buy the land and to build the first building. That was on the table of the Board of Regents. Of course, my dad was on the school board then. I've got all the documents on the motion and all that kind of stuff. And so Bartow County couldn't come up with that, and that's where it was scheduled to go because of the being centrally located. That was Carl Sanders' dream, to have a college, junior college in every congressional district, and we got Kennesaw that way. And of course, we'd already gotten the Area Technical School, and that was sponsored by the Cobb School Board and the Meredith School Board.
Was that Chattahoochee Tech?
Yeah, that was in '62, and then Southern Tech was moved over in the late '50s to the property over there. It's now Southern Tech. So that's kind of the education beginning.
Chattahoochee Technical College was formed here, or was it moved here? I'll make sure I understand.
It was formed here.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
it was administered. Dad was on the school board then. J.F. Shaw was on the Meredith School Board. Dad and Mr. Dickerson and John Strother and Buck Pittner from Ackworth. And both boards met every other month to talk about the Area Technical School. Then later they determined to let Marietta actually manage the school, and it came under the Meredith school system, when Lloyd Cox was superintendent. And he just passed away not too long.
There was been a lot of discussion, Joe, about in these interviews about the formation of Southern Poly and its relationship with Lockheed. Are you familiar with any of that from reading?
Well, it was over at Chamblee, the Naval Air Station over at Chamblee. That's where the Navy base was moved from over there, and that's where the college came from. But now there was a lot of now the technical school, when Lee Leverett was there, he was their first president or the second president. They set up classes based on Lockheed's needs and trained students, because when I went to some of the graduations, Lee Leverett would get up at First Methodist Church, said everybody gets a certificate, already had 5 job offers. So that's pretty good. Georgia Tech couldn't say that, or University of Georgia probably, but they could in the technical, because they were training the workforce where people could get good paying jobs.
So the water.
Can I interrupt again? Sure. The same thing I did last time. He asked you about Polytech.
Yes.
And you answered by saying, well, it did this, it did this. If you can remember, if you can call it to the phone and remember, well, Polytech did this, or Governor Brumby did this, so that we know what you're talking about.
Okay.
We can fix it. This man can handle it.
Yeah.
But it just makes it a lot easier for
Well,
you.
it started at Southern Tech, and then it
What started at Southern Tech?
Southern Poly. Yeah. Okay.
You see
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say?
You like my wife. She said you're thinking something. You think I'm hearing some stuff you're thinking, and I hadn't heard it yet.
Are you married to my wife too? Because the last guy was married to my wife. I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's all right. Okay.
That's a big help in the
I don't do this very often, and even if I had practice, I wouldn't be there.
Nobody does it very often.
By the way, I don't tell everybody this, some have already said it, but when we get done, if you want raw footage of all this stuff for your family, their generations on
okay.
now, Lee Ryan just asked that before he walked out. And I've got a whole story about that. We'll talk about that later. So.
But I think with Bell Aircraft and Lockheed coming back in, Foster Yates was president of the chamber that year, '51, which was a big thing for the area. But one thing that came out of the Lockheed coming here, and of course they came here to refurbish B-29s for Korea. Then they assembled a 100 B-47s for Boeing. Then they won the C-130 contract. Kelly Johnson, the chief engineer with Lockheed, would not sign that contract with the government because he didn't like the C-130. It was an ugly airplane. That's according to Bob Ormsby. And we'll send that to Georgia because they probably won't manufacture but 100 of them at the most. And Ormsby liked to always point out that, Lockheed ceases to exist in California, and we're still mass producing C-130s. And
Miss Bob.
But it's the longest produced military aircraft in world aviation history, C-130. And Andrew Young used to help sell them to third world countries.
Do you remember the number they actually have manufactured so far? I think I read in the paper.
At 2,800 or something. I remember reading that as well. Yeah.
It's a big number. So.
But what came out of this, it's really important. It's an untold story. And they're making a book on it now, and I brought you some substantial information backing it up. Is after the C-130, then they wanted a jet transport, the government. And Lockheed bid on the C-141. That's what the final it was the C-141, and we all know what a C-141. This came about in the late 50s. Well, during the late 50s, mid to late 50s, they started a program called Plans for Progress at Lockheed. I don't know if anybody has mentioned this up to this point. And I brought you the picture of John Kennedy and the president of Lockheed signing it and so forth. The Plans for Progress, that was put together here in Marietta. They hired 1,200 unemployable blacks and brought them in and changed the restroom signs, but didn't publicize it, just did it within the plant. And they'd start working these people in where somebody was out or needed another person, can so-and-so vote, sure. So they started meshing the whole workforce just by need, business need. So when they got the C-141 contract, Kennedy had just been elected, and Bobby Troutman Sanders was legal advisor for Lockheed and was John Kennedy's campaign manager for Georgia. So the Black Caucus raised a lot of ruckus about that going to a segregated state. See, this is all before Martin Luther King. This was 1960-61. So they sent federal investigators to Marietta. And when they got there, they saw the plant was integrated. Well, how'd you do this? Well, they pulled out the Plans for Progress and showed in detail what they did. Well, it later was tweaked and was a federal model. But I brought you a picture of LBJ and John Kennedy signed it in 1961. So that made a big difference for 141, the C-5, the F-22, and
yeah.
So that was very significant. And Andy Young, knows about this, and that didn't happen in New York or California. That happened in Marietta, Georgia, a segregated state, which is tremendous, I think.
No, it is. And I was to say that I got pretty involved with Georgia Fire Company in the diversity program. It was called Diversity and Inclusion. And we hired some consultants to talk about it. They said, you don't have to go very far to study diversity. It all started right here in Cobb.
Yeah, right.
Jan Cooper told me this story.
It was really amazing, I thought. And I was at Lee Wright's retirement at the chamber, matter of fact. You remember when Ralph Heath came from Fort Worth?
Yeah,
was there?
Set that up. Yeah.
Well, we were sitting there talking about, I told my dad worked at Bell Aircraft at Lockheed. He said, I'm going to tell you something about this community. He said, and nobody ever told me this before, but this is Ralph Heath. He said, Lockheed gets more community support in Marietta and Cobb County than any other facility Lockheed owns in the corporation. It's right here, which I thought spoke well for Cobb in supporting the Lockheed.
So what was the next big event that helped shape Cobb County? I think we got.
Okay, I got down. I mentioned two people you've already interviewed, but I think Earl Smith and the SPLOST for transportation. That was the first SPLOST for transportation in the state. Then when John and the others formed the Cumberland CID, that was the first community improvement district in the state.
What year was that?
That was in 85, 86, somewhere in there. About the time Trammell was breaking ground for his buildings. I'll tell you one other little interesting side note. Lee Rogers called me from Lockheed one afternoon, and this was right after we had merged with First Railroad Company. Excuse me. And he said, well, you know, the C5B contract is up, and we're working that through Congress, and Ms. Dorrance has been there 100 days this year, and said we want the state to be 100% for this. That was the largest contract up until that, $100 billion. Do you know anybody at Macon? Because Bowen's got a facility there, and we need some help. And I gave him Monroe Kimball's name, who was on our First Railroad board, who was former president of the Federal Reserve, and John Zellers, who was CEO of Georgia Federal, and they had big locations down in Macon. So I got this letter from Ormsby saying that helped them resoundingly. Then Lee calls back in a couple of weeks and said, you don't know anybody in Texas, do you? I said, no, I sure don't. I know Trammell Crow's spending a lot of money in Cobb, and I'm sure he'd like to see Lockheed do well. He said, well, can you help us out? Do you know anybody? I said, well, I tell you what, Don Childress represents him in Cobb County on all of his properties, and I said, maybe I could get him. He said, well, where can he come over and have lunch with us at Lockheed? So I called Don Childress and asked him if he'd ever been to Lockheed. He said, no, but I've always wanted to go. I said, well, we're going to go, and we're going to eat lunch, and we're going to get a tour of Lockheed. So he came over, and they took him all over the plant. He got back, wanted to know what they needed, what he needed to send to Mr. Crow, and they put together a package and sent it out, and Trammell Crow turned around 4 or 5 votes. Now that's a lot, that's 10 votes if you can do that. And that gave them the margin they was looking for. So when they were finishing up the C5 program, the refurbishing those 50, I called Lockheed and got Don Childress on another tour, so we were over there last year, and they let him walk across that last C5. So, but Don Childress, I mean, this was not paid consultants doing this. This was just folks, you know, from, I mean, that's the example of what Cobb County is. They'll help whether they're getting paid or not, because it's good for the county, good for the community. So,
next big thing, would you consider a big factor in shaping who Cobb County is today?
Shaping who Cobb County is today.
It didn't happen by accident. Everybody has different theories and suggestions. Like one thing that David Hankerson said and Roy Barnes said is Cobb has a special way of doing things.
Yeah.
We label it the Cobb way. And that really involves communicating more broadly than most counties do, working on relationships. And Joe, that's what you do. You bring people together. A lot of counties don't do that. So people actually know each other. Even the thing you do at your bank. I mean, you probably know you're changing history. People get together, they shake hands, they don't even know each other. Now they know each other. They make phone calls. You don't even know it. They make phone
Well,
calls.
when you get people together eating and singing, like, we get our little song groups, and Roy's going to be in this next song group Wednesday, and I was going to allude to that a little bit. We're having the 100th anniversary of the Georgia Department of Banking and Finance for the state.
Thursday, right?
Right, and Jimmy Blanchard's coming up. Yeah. And Jimmy Blanchard's coming up, and Roy's going to be there. But you'll get some Democrats, you get some Republicans. But when you get people together, you find out they've got more in common than they differ on. It's just that simple. And I like to use this story. I was at the Capitol, and Steve Thompson was in the rotunda and had a crowd of people, 100, 150 people. And what they were doing, he was presenting a resolution renaming or naming the bridge over I-75 over the Chattahoochee River after Lester and Virginia Maddox. And I looked, and there sat Lester Maddox. She had already died. And Hosea Williams sitting on the front row. Well, you know, they were opposites on integration and segregation, but they were good friends. And he recognized him as one of his closest friends. So when the newspaper, the AJC, started interviewing Hosea, well, how can you and Lester Maddox be close friends and you're so opposed on integration and segregation? Well, he kind of bowed up and said, well, that's all we differ on. We agree on everything else. But he said, we disagree on one thing, but we trust each other. He helps me and I help him. So that's the key, I think. You may be different on one or two things. I think in Cobb there's more of a level of trust. That's why you hadn't had a lot of, bad situations with commissioners and that sort of thing. I think there's a big level of trust there.
I think
in my opinion, that's what I said.
Opinion. That's what we want. But I think another element of this Cobb way is, in a strange kind of way, and you would understand that some people want, was Otis Brumby, because he kept everybody honest. And if you didn't want to trust somebody, that's fine. But he kept cities and governments accountable for doing the right thing with people's money. And that's not the case in a lot of places.
Well, you're exactly.
Sort of talk about that a little bit.
Well, I'm going to give you one example of Otis Brumby on the second CID we had in Cobb County. That was the town center. Skip Spann asked me, would I help him put together another CID? He said, town center is going to be the next big growth area. And I said, well, I don't know a thing about a CID. He said, well, I don't either, but I just wanted to get your thoughts. So I went and met him, and he had drawn this map with a shopping center in the middle. Of course, you had to include some of the big ones, Vulcan, Taylor Mathis, and Weeks Construction. You had to have some of the big ones in there to make it work. So he had kind of a rough draft laid out. And he said, what do you think? I said, well, it looks fine. I said, maybe what I think we ought to do, we ought to sit down with Otis Brumby and get his thoughts on it and advice and see if we're in the right direction. And he said, do you think we need to do that? And I said, well, I think it would be good to do that. And so we went down and met with Otis. And you know how fast he would talk. What you got there? Joe says, you're working on another seal. Let me see what you got. So he put it out on his desk, drew a big circle, saw the circle, and Otis got down real close and put his finger right in the middle of that circle. He said, I've got property right here. Well, that meant he was going to be taxed. And I thought, uh-oh. And he looked up and he said, you know what? I think it's a good idea. He said, I tell you what I'll do. I will go ahead and commit to sign the first consent form for my property. And said, you don't need to publicize any of this to get your ducks in a row, because that might be coming out of the woodwork before you get to explain what it's going to do for the area. So when you're ready to have it publicized, you call me. So we walked out of the paper, Skip said, you know, he consented to sign the first consent form and they could let us control the publicity. I said, well, it never hurts to get advice from somebody that likes to give good, and they give good advice. So now that was my that's one of my thoughts on Otis Brumby.
Well, we've heard everybody talks about us. It goes from I hated the guy to I love the guy to somewhere in the middle. But what we were always after was, you know, he provided a tremendous service to this county, and a lot of people.
He was smart. He was on the
really smart.
DOT board. He's on the state education board.
He had a mind. He didn't forget anything.
No.
That could be good or it could be bad. But anyway, what do you think was key to having a good relationship with Otis Brumby?
Well,
because you knew him and you were good friends, so
I always trusted him. I went to him when I first went with the bank, which was 52 years ago, soon be 53. And Steve Tumlin was chairman of the bank board, and he said, now you need to go visit with Otis, you need to visit with Judge Manning, Shuler Antley, former school superintendent. You know J.J. Daniel, y'all are distantly related. So he named over a few people I needed to go visit. So Otis was one of them, and he had been running the paper a couple of years. He was a year older than I was. I was 25 and he was 26. And I told him what I was doing, and Steve Tumlin said I should come by and visit with him. He said, well, I'll tell you somebody you need to meet. He said, they're not in Marietta, but they're a mover and a shaker. You need to call on Bill Ward, lives down on Paper Mill Road. His wife's got one of those horses, got a big horse barn down there. But he built Balmonte Shopping Center. And said, you ought to just meet him because you'll learn some things from him. So I called Mr. Ward and asked him if I could. He said, sure, come on down. We'll go to lunch. So I go down there. His desk looked like Bill Kenny's desk. And fire going in an old fireplace. And he said, young man, I'm one of the founders of the New Atlanta Country Club, and I'm going to carry you to lunch down there. So that's where we went. He introduced me like I was somebody. You know, this is Joe Daniel, my friend of Otis Brumby's, and I want you to meet Joe Daniel. Now that was nice. I never did forget that.
Well, I've heard a lot of people talk about Otis. There's two things you don't do. You can repeat this so we'll have it on camera later, but you never lied to him, and you never tried to hide anything that at some point could come out. So in your own words, describe those two factors.
Well,
if you were giving advice to somebody that's new into the county, what would you tell them about Otis Brumby so they wouldn't stick their foot in a pothole?
Well, I was just kind of that way with most everybody. You know, I didn't want to have to look over my shoulder. And I always, you know, pretty much come up with what I thought the truth was. I know when we found out Otis had that cancer, and Lee Wright and I were having lunch at the Georgian Club the day I found out. I knew he'd had some problems, but I didn't know what it was. And I'd found out from Kim Isaza that Otis had bone cancer. And so I don't know why Lee wanted to eat lunch, but we were eating lunch, and I told him and said, we're going to pray for him right now. So we did. Well, we had done a prayer lunch for Strickland, and it included Roy and some folks, you know, the good friends of Strick, his pastor and so forth. And Lee said, well, why don't we do something like this for Otis? I said, well, I don't know. Otis is pretty private, and I don't know if he would let us do something like that. And so I was in Roy's office a little bit later, and I said something to Roy about it. And Roy said, well, I can just tell you right now, you just hear me real clear. He said, Otis will not let you do that. I don't think he will. I said, well, I'm going to ask him, and he can tell me no, I guess. So I called up Otis right after that. I told Roy I'd let him know what he said, and I mentioned it to Otis, and he said, well, I did miss that prayer breakfast or prayer lunch you did for Strick, but I understand it was real good. He said, you know, I think I'd like it. just like that. I didn't know what to say. I mean, you can see where my faith was going out the window. And I said, well, when you want to do it? He said, well, you're as busy as I am. Y'all pick a date, and I'll give you some names to invite. And so I called William Wright, and I said, you're on. You do the praying, and I'll do the lunch. So, of course, I called Roy back, and it turned out, but it was another side of Otis. It really showed him he really had friends. He helped me with the names, because I didn't know who he was close to. But it was not a surprise when I saw the names.
I did one for him, Mary Aquinas. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I do.
Johnny Isaacs and I got together.
Yeah, I remember. I remember.
You know, people say nice things about folks at their funeral, right? And they don't know what they're going to say.
Right.
So he and I put together a speaking panel. We got Conley Ingram to speak. Maybe remember that. Sam Olwoods, who's county commission chair. But see, Otis didn't know that one. We kept that a big secret. And he thought Johnny Isaacson was going to update everybody on Congress. So some of his friends urged him to go. And so he reluctantly went. And of course, the whole family was hiding. You know, and the program started. He looked around. Here come his kids, grandkids.
I heard all. Yeah,
something's up. And then he found out. I think Johnny was the first one to talk about that. But I was the master of ceremonies, and it wasn't too long before I asked the question: how many of you have been in and around town? About three. We had about 300, 250 people. Most everybody raised their hand. And there were a few people raising two hands. Yeah, you don't want to get around town. Usually it wasn't good for you.
Well, it was. I know Bill Kenny called me one Friday. He's bad about doing this. He needed 2 more paragraphs around town for Saturday. Well, give me something. You know, so I said, I don't really know anything going on. And I never did give him anything except something positive, you know. Well, you can come up with 2 paragraphs. Whatever way you send it, you type it, I'll guarantee you I'll run it the way you type it. And I said, Kenny, if Otis finds out about this, he's going to fire me and you both. He said, he ain't going to fire me or you, either one. So you need to give me. But it was, you know, they were straight talkers. You know, Kenny was that way too, I thought.
Tell me about Ernest Barrett. There's not that many people actually knew Ernest. They knew of him. They could see him, but people who actually knew him, and I know you did.
Well, he shocked me one day, to be honest with you.
Who shocked him?
Ernest did, big time. I forgot what year it was. I'd been working on the Stay-in-Sea, Georgia, which was a state chamber program, and Mr. Graham had me to be the 7th District Chair, and of course that included working with Virginia Tumlin, which meant work, you know, and so it wasn't that he wanted to eat lunch, but he stopped on the street, and I recognized that big 98 Oldsmobile. And he blew the horn and waved for me to come on. I went over to the car, and it was about 11:15. He said, "Partner, you eating lunch by yourself?" I said, "Are you eating anywhere?" I said, "No." "Well, I don't like to eat by myself."
That's okay. We'll cut the phone. We forgot to do that too.
Hello. Yeah, I'm in this interview.
Okay.
All right. Is anything urgent? Okay, all right, bye. Why, she forgot about this, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
But he said, well, I don't like to eat by myself. Why don't you go with me?
Could you start over?
Oh,
So we
okay.
know who we're talking about.
Okay. Were you asking me?
Yeah, I was asking to do the Ernest Barrett thing. We cut everything out that we said so far because it wasn't that much.
Okay.
Talk about
Ernest Barrett, my opinion of Ernest Barrett. Well, he kind of shocked me one time when I was walking between the 2 buildings there on Raleigh Street and stopped and blew the horn and asked me if I was eating lunch with him. I said no. He said, "Well, eat with me. I don't like to eat by myself." So I wondered if he had something in mind. So we went wherever it was, Joe's Steakhouse, and he just wanted to talk about things in general. And he was just nice to me, and I really appreciated that. I mean, he didn't want anything. Just say if I could ever help you or whatever.
Well, you know what, Joe?
It was the little, it was like Bill Ward. He didn't have to do what he did for me. And Ernest didn't either, but he did, so.
Well, one of the things that, again, is part of the way Cobb ran, everybody that knew him, and you probably will acknowledge what I'm about to say, is Ernest was not necessarily the smartest person in the world, but he did something that a lot of people don't do. He got folks together and just talked to them.
Exactly.
Lunches and breakfast, mostly breakfast. And he said, I'm thinking about this, or I'm thinking about that.
And he left office worth a lot less money than when he went in office.
Yeah.
Does that tell you anything? And you've probably been told that before. Yeah. But he was, I remember on this Stay and See Georgia thing, we got off on this Welcome Center property up on I-75. And so we'd been looking at that. And Lee Rogers is one I suggested that I, not worry about putting something on 41, putting something to do with Lockheed or getting something. The Corps of Engineers said focus on I-75. Said they disapproved the route they're going to cross. So Burt Lance was DOT commissioner, so Art Latter and I went down to see him to see if there might be a possibility why they were buying right away. And he leaned over that desk and wanted to know if Ernest wanted it. And I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, I want to know if Ernest Berry wants it. Because he's impressed us, and he's the first president of the ARC, which you probably know. And so we went back to see Ernest, and he knew we were dicking around with something. He even didn't know what, but I told him what Burt Lance had said, and he says, he gonna pay for it? And I said, I think so. He said, yeah, but he's gonna pay for it. So that's how we got that property. It was just, Ernest was trusted by a lot of people. And George Thompson was his biggest supporter. And of course, me being familiar with George Thompson, Steve's daddy was always kind of a mentor for me early on.
So,
and he really supported the Chamber. George Thompson really supported the Chamber of Commerce.
There are some other milestones along the way. We sort of got up to Ernest Berry. What do you think some other significant things were for this county? If you were writing lists, the most important events, what else would be important in your mind that, again, helped to shape this county so we could have the Atlanta Braves here?
Mm-hmm.
Who were the players, and how did they shape this county?
Well, I think Tim Lee's done a lot for the county, and I think that was a good. You got to have some visionaries, and Ernest Berry was one of them. Harold Willingham was one of them too, because Harold put a lot of things together along with Lex Jolly, the funding and the bonds. Somebody had to stick their neck out. And Walter Graham told me something one time, said, unless somebody makes a little money, and people threw off on Harold Willingham, nothing ever happens. So somebody's got to make some money. But don't worry about that $500,000 they made. Think about what we benefited, all of us, from what they did and whatever Harold put together, like the connection of I-75 and working on that. That's benefited a lot of people. Maybe got some bond fees or attorney fees off those bond issues with Lex Jolly, but how did Cobb benefit from it? Our lives were better. We made more money, and our companies were successful. And that was one thing. I think transportation's done well. With East-West Connector and things that Earl Smith laid the foundation for.
David Hankerson listed that as one of his biggest accomplishments.
Yeah.
What year was that, Bill? Do you know?
About 85 or 6, was it? I know there was different stages. Bill Byrne, it was over there where we crossed all the creek. That was Bill Byrne's part. I think Earl was the first part that opened right there at Austell Road. I forgot how far. I think it went from Powder Springs Road to Austell Road.
Right in front of the hospital.
Yeah, in front of the hospital. And, you know, Ernest was one of the beginning directors of the hospital when they formed Cobb Hospital down there. Because Steve Patterson was on that board, and, you know, Ernest was involved with Smyrna Federal, with Wyman Pilcher, Wyman's father. And actually, the folks in Smyrna wanted that hospital at Smyrna, and Ernest said, no, we need it where it served more counties. Ernest went for the location where it's located now instead of putting it in Smyrna.
Depending on who you talk, but the formation of Wellstar and growth of Wellstar was an important part of our county.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a lot of political angles to it.
Yeah, Otis and Bernie.
Yeah, go ahead. We talked about it. But
did you? Okay, you know that part.
Yeah, know that part, but go ahead and tell that story. How did it come about? What did a merger of South Cobb Hospital and Marietta Hospital, or whatever it's called?
Well, Kennestone was built in 1950, 49 or 50. Scott Edwards was their legal attorney and wouldn't take a fee till they were making money, which I thought was unusual. I mean, that's the kind of folks that made a lot of these things happen. Now, T.W. Lord, you know, was the longest serving, still living hospital. He went on at 60.
He was on my list to interview.
Yeah, T.W. Yeah. Now, he knew. We'd go to the Piccadilly, and I'll tell you this, one day, Mike Boyce, you know, he's a big baseball fan himself, and we were going down and have lunch with Taylor Phillips, who pitched for the Braves when they won the World Series in Milwaukee. And we were going to have lunch, so we got over to TW's, and Mike looked at me, looked at TW, and said, y'all want me to drive? So he said, sure. So but TW was really, he knew how to talk to all groups pretty much. And I think that was a great hospital authority. You know, Lucius Athram was on there, and Joe Mack Wilson, Dr. James Manning, and Ferguson, who just died too, about a week after. Matter of fact, Bernie Brown spoke at both funerals, TW's, and is it Charlie Ferguson? He was the first black to go on the hospital authority.
Well, I think that the authority had a lot to do with the great start of that hospital.
Oh, it did. It really did. And you came when Eddington came from Hiram, the first black.
Yeah, right.
You came to that because I remember they did an article, and you were up there at the hospital when he took a tour of that thing.
What do you think Otis didn't like me?
I didn't know he didn't. I didn't know he didn't like it.
I told the story out. Bill Kenny was still okay, although he was going down. And I went over to MDJ and
y'all filming this part while Otis don't like him. Okay.
Yeah, he pulled in and Bill Kenny was walking out, and I said, "Hello, Mr. Kenny, how you doing?" He said, he looked at me and says, "Otis doesn't like you." I thought that's the only thing he said. Then he walked up, and I know what the issue there was. But any more stories or anything about Wellstar? Because it's obviously a big part of who we are today.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the largest employer as of today.
I tell you, the biggest function, the two biggest functions in Cobb County was the Kennestone Ball and the Cobb Chamber Dinner. Those were the two big things. And I know a lot of those people attended both. Glenda and I we were co-treasurers of the Hospital Guild. That's what they called the foundation back in those days, with several other people, Steve and Virginia Tumlin and several others. And Kennesaw was kind of like Kennesaw Junior College. You had that first strong foundation. Kennesaw College was the Tumlins and Wyman Pilcher and all, and then you had some of those heavy folks there with the hospitals. Roy was one of them, and you had that great community support. You've got to have that. That's what Lockheed talks. If Lockheed talks about it, you can see that it's important for the hospital system. It's important for the legal community, which Cobb is the second largest bar association in the state of Georgia. It's Cobb, you probably know that. But I think it's that community, varied community support.
That's one.
I think that's one big thing. And you know, the Chamber's always supported that. And of course, we had Heart Balls, and Skip and I co-chaired that one year. And
Prayer breakfast.
And the prayer breakfast, that has probably brought more factions. You know, to have a prayer breakfast in Metro Atlanta is a little bit unusual, especially to be the second largest in the country now, you know, next to Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I've been a speaker a long time ago, but we have something at Cobb Prayer Breakfast, and we'll have 1,100 people there. And you have to buy a ticket.
Where do you do it?
Galleria.
Galleria. And nobody else does that. Joe said something I didn't know, the second largest in the nation. We have the people we have coming to speak are world-class well. I mean, who came this last time?
Well, we had Roy and Nathan Deal, two opposing people, sitting there giving their thoughts on how their prayer life in the office, you know, this giving their experience. And Deal got choked up 2 or 3 times, talking about his childhood and what he went to training union and all the, you know, started reliving. The way that started was just one. Bill Askey had the idea, and he asked me what I thought about it, and I said, well, we've never had anything that big before. He said, well, the state has one, the nation has one. And I said, well, we need somebody to sponsor it. You know, that maybe the Chamber's got some interest, so we'll.
Careful not to hit your microphone.
Get it.
Probably a good time to do it.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
No,
But a lot of
no,
this-
I thank you. I insist.
Okay.
Some of this stuff ain't gonna be worth you putting on it, so you can erase half of what I'm saying more.
That's his job.
That's his job.
Okay.
We work for Ty.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
And he's been doing a great job. I've seen some of his videos. Yeah. Call me tomorrow.
We'll do.
We can just chat.
Yeah, for sure.
All
All right.
right.
Yes.
All
I
right.
know Joe probably could write that book. This is Tom's book.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So, all right.
Carry on, boss. I'll be
Thank
in
you.
and out of the area all day. And you call me anytime you want to. You've got.
I need I don't have your contact information.
Well,
Ty can send it to
I'll
us.
give it to you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go be a Boy Scout now.
All right. You just dropped a pin about it.
Nice to meet
Well,
you.
that's an expensive pen too. Where did it go? There it is. There are 2 of them. They cost like 29 cents a piece.
Oh, well, you know, that
I
break the
know.
bank.
Every little bit helps.
Yes, it does.
Thanks, guys. Thank
Nice
you
to
very
meet
much,
you.
sir.
So I went to the Chamber, and John Williams, that's his first year, and I brought it up under special projects.
John Williams did a.
See, you can have an idea, but if somebody don't give you the opportunity, it's just like you don't have it, the idea. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people have had ideas and were given an opportunity to come to. Because John said straight out, you know how he was, he said, well, go talk to some people in the community. We don't need to be trying to do something, and we don't know what kind of support we're going to get in the community. So I go out and call Al Burris and Roy and everybody, and I got about 20, which I thought were key people. Came back the next month, and John wanted to know, what'd you find out? I said, well, I've got a list of the people said they'd support it whatever way we wanted them to, and I started reading the list. I got to about number 10, and John gave me this big knock it off. And he said, my daddy said when you sold something, quit selling. Said, you've talked to enough people, we're like a bunch of atheists over here if we don't have this thing. But you got to sign in blood, it won't cost the chamber any money. And the reason it didn't is because Al Burris stepped up and did what we were short, so we could do it again.
So many people that know history, that don't know history, don't really appreciate John Williams and what he did.
Oh,
You know, their memories.
there's no question. There's no
question.
I've told him to his face, and I've told Johnny Gresham. I said people just don't. I said a lot of the things that John did we don't even know. Money he's given that.
Did you go to his funeral?
Yeah.
I did too. That story about the yellow pad was to me one of the most fascinating elements of that program.
Mm.
Where John would go in every morning and list what he wanted to do that day.
Yeah.
And then when the son was cleaning out the office, every one of those for years and years was in his top desk drawer.
Well,
Something my wife would do.
He shook up First Union because when we were merged with First Union, they had sold to Barnett Bank, his bank. And so when I was down at the Galleria in the office down there where we'd merged some Georgia State Bank, they went with First Union, so it was there where Lee Partain had his office, so that's where the headquarters for Cobb was. So they said, well, now they got Ben Kelly was heading up the Cobb group. Who are some things we need to talk? Who in the government? And I know you know a lot of people. And I said, well, we don't have any business with John Williams, but I think we ought to call on him just out of courtesy because First Union is a large organization. And I said, you never know. And I said, but just out of courtesy, I think you ought to call. So, okay, well, I called him, set up lunch with John's secretary. And we had, he used to have a little table over to the side where he would sit. And we sat down, me and Ben Kelly, and we talked a while. John was very courteous, easy to talk to. And I said, I know you're on the Barnett board, and this is First Union, but if anything ever comes up we can never help you with, you know to call us. And of course, Ben was yawning, we wasting our time type thing. And John said, well, tell you what, I don't do business with a bank where I'm on the board. And said, I've got something up in North Carolina, says that's where y'all are from. I'm going to refinance a project up there. It'd be about $6 million. And I got some capital funds I'll move to you, the process, if y'all would like to look at it. So they brought the corporate group in from Atlanta, and you never knew what John, but he was courteous. I don't know if it was because of me, I don't think it was, but he just thought it was a good thing for him to do. But I liked him, I trusted him.
I'm going to have to go to the men's room at my age, pretty often. I do have a question which you can pretend I'm sitting here and answer.
I'll sit down while you're going.
Yeah. The question to me is the whole history of the gay resolution that was passed in Cobb. That what you know about? Because it was in the book. It shaped a lot of things. A lot of people around Atlanta said Cobb is a bigoted county, so forth and so on. So if you talk about that, I'll be right back.
Well, the people that said they would move out of Cobb because of it, never did move out of Cobb. It's kind of like the people, if Trump was elected president, he's going to move out of the United States, and they never, I think it was probably not a good thing to do, but I don't think it hurt Cobb County that much because with the way things are today, you're divided in the country bigger and more than you were back then, and so it could have affected Cobb some, but with Cobb's growth, it doesn't look like that. People think about that anymore because of the makeup of the county and how the demographics have changed over the last 20 years. This was back in the 90s, I guess, 96, when the Olympics came to Cobb, or came to Atlanta. I just don't hear that much about it anymore, but it's just a lot of things now are a lot different than they were even then, so
okay.
That's about.
How? What are your thoughts on maybe the African American community in Cobb County and its role in Cobb County throughout history, and Ann Bonner, Zion Baptist Church, and all that? Just as kind of an outsider, but from as a viewer, as an observer.
I got some of the ministers together that had served long periods of time in Cobb County, like Bob Baxter from Mapleton, who had served at Mount Harmony for 48 years, and Mike Woods from First Baptist Powder Springs, Jim Speed, First Presbyterian, Charles Sineth, First Methodist, and Harris Travis was Zion Baptist Church. And we all got together. Why they were long-term ministers, you know, what about their ministry enabled them to serve a church? Because a lot of times there's a lot of turnover in pastors of churches. And he had some interesting comments about how, of course, Nelson Price was one of them too. He served Rawson Street for 35 years. He was talking about how supportive all the other churches were during the civil rights movement, how it helped him. Said everybody tried to help each other in a nice way. And that's Cobb. You just don't see a lot of that. I mean, you'll have some disagreements and whatever, but you don't see like you do in some areas. We've kind of, Ivan Allen, I think, played a big role in keeping Atlanta during the 60s under, you know, not under control, but not as much of a turmoil as other cities throughout the country. So.
Done?
Yeah, I also asked him about the African American community.
I talked about Harris Travis when I got some pastors together, Nelson Price and Charles Sineth and Jim Speed, and with some that helped with the prayer breakfast. Long-term pastors, what did they attribute their success to staying at the church for a long period of time? And when Harris Travis' time came, he wanted to brag on the other churches how they helped him during the civil rights. Everybody was so supportive and said it made it a lot easier for him and everybody else. Well, same way with the school systems. I think we had less problems than a lot of other areas. Now the county is changing demographics. That's going to affect Cobb County.
So I have a question about, we've only touched on it a little bit, and that was with Lee Ryan. I learned fairly quickly when I got into this job that Winston Strickland was a powerful man.
Yeah.
And he was a barber, and it didn't make any difference. If you had some issues that needed dealing with, he was, people listened to him, I guess. Talk a little about Strick.
Well, I like Strick. You know, he's one of those guys you trust. And of course, Roy had known him a long time, and he knew a lot of people in the community. Kind of like James Dodd, it was on the Mayor City Council. I always that's how I found out about this Dr. Eddington. I had no idea who he was. Lived in Hiram, was on staff at up in Ohio, University of Ohio. Let's see, the University of Ohio, I think, is where he was on staff, and. But James was always like Strick. They were good friends. You know, they grew up together, and I went to Strick's funeral. I went to James Dodd's daddy's funeral down there at the funeral home, and they were separate community, but you were still supportive of each other. You see what I'm saying? It was. You didn't live together and you didn't go to church together by and large, but you worked, you ate, you saw people. James and I's wife's done my clothes for years and years, and I just count her as a real good friend. And,
yeah, I did too. And you never knew
Strick, he was he just came across as just a community guy. He's from Cartersville. Robert Menham, he knew him real well. And
well, you know, the thing that always impressed me about him is you never knew if he was a Republican or a Democrat. I suspect he was a Democrat, but you never knew it. People just wanted his advice, not just because he was African American, but he had a grasp on the community.
Yeah, he did. He
particularly
did.
Marietta.
And he did more so. Probably, I don't know how it would be today with all the influx. We've had such a big influx in the last 20 years. I don't know and him getting older and not as connected. You know, I'm not as connected probably as I was 20.
Yeah.
Still a good bit by, you know, continuing to work. But I tell you one thing, that another thing that made Cobb County, I think, unusual when you got back to education was Sheila Antler's funeral. Horace Sturgis and his wife was at that funeral at First Baptist Church. That was Sam Hughes, his father-in-law, you know. And we were walking down the sidewalk, and he said, I mean, this is an example of strict and people, you know, that are helping each other. And he said, Joe, did I ever tell you about talking with Sheila Antler when they had asked me to head up this beginning of this junior college? And I said, no. He said, Sheila Antler gave me some advice. Now remember, he's former superintendent of our school system. He said, now Horace, you're going to get a lot of pressure for that junior college to be in Marietta. But I'm here to tell you don't need to do that, because you need to be where you're looking, because you'll serve a bigger part of the community. You'll be landlocked here. You won't have the expansion that you'll have there. So you do what's best for the college, and you don't worry about the pressure here in Marietta. And he was from Marietta. Now that's, to me, that's what makes.
Well, but that's also a great story, because we haven't had anybody actually talk much about KSU. And we have talked to anybody that seems to know. I'm going to be talking to Tom, because he's written about it, about how the KSU got started. You know, it's a university now, 36,000 people.
I know it. Well, when that came up in 1963, of course, Carl Sanders got it started because that was his goal. But the problem was that Cartersville was the most centrally located city in the 7th District. So that's where it was really. And of course, Horace had some relatives up there as well, or his wife did. So that was the big focus, was Cartersville. Well, Harold Willingham represented the school board. And there were 5 of them on the board. And that's Mr. Dickerson and John Strother and Daddy and Buck Pittner and Dr. Mitchell. And so Harold said, if we want a junior college, the only way we can afford it is to do it through the school system. But we got to change state law to do it. And so they did have to change state law in '63 for our school system to spend money beyond the 12th grade. But they had a bond issue, and it carried 8-1 in the county to do it, and 10-1 in the city. Well, Lloyd Cox and Sheila, they worked on that to get that big number up for Marietta. Of course, I've got it in the minutes and so forth. And John Strother told me a lot of this because Daddy had already passed away. Well, Jasper didn't want to do it. And he wanted another high school, Jasper Griffin. And Daddy and John and Buck, all they needed was 3 votes to do it, and Mr. Dixon and Dr. Mitchell went along with it. So that's how close it was to make it happen. But the feeling was it would be much better to spend some money on that college to have a continuing education for a lot of kids graduating. It would not, because of money, be able to get a continued higher education if they had to go outside of Cobb County. So that's the reason for sacrificing and doing it through the school system. And they paid $1.9 million for the county, and the city came up with $450,000. And I've got the letter that Harold Willingham carried the Board of Regents for $2 million to build the first buildings, and they bought the land for $100,000, 150 acres.
Amazing.
$750 an acre. And deeded the property over the same time they deeded the property over when they bought it to the Board of Regents.
What year was that? Roughly?
64.
A lot of people have labeled you as a godfather. I want to know why, but I also, and maybe it's part of the answer, also know Dan Cox and I chatted about that a little while. Most people in this county that were heavily involved, did not know the invisible behind-the-scenes role that Joe Daniel played of getting people together. And just like the Vinings Bank thing Thursday, you know, some of the people there won't know how it all happened. Well, it happened because of Joe Daniel.
Yeah.
So just answer that question, and maybe you can bring that in, but don't be humble.
Well, you know, I learned something early on. You know, you go when you get older, you go back to, well, what made me want to do that? You know, maybe I didn't want to do it, and I was made to do it, and it was the thing to do. But when I first went with the bank, Walter Graham hired me. I didn't have a formal education, and I said, you know, I don't know a thing about banking. I want somebody to sell banking to the community. And I said, well, I don't know anything about banking. He said, well, you've got integrity, you don't mind working, and you got a sense of law. He said, I can teach you everything else, but I can't teach you that. You got to have that. And I just want you to sell banking to the community. If they ask you a question you don't know, tell them you don't know and come back and get the answer. So he gave me that first job. Civic job was a heart fund, rather, just a heart fund, $28,000. And Art, what was his last name? He was at Lockheed, was on the state committee, and that's how I got roped into that. So anyway, I went and met with a lady. She's going to have office space for 3 months and raise $28,000, and Lockheed would help with $1 a month and all that. She said, I need an account. You need to set up an account at your bank. We'll put the money there for 3 months, and then we'll write a check on it when it's over. So I told Mr. Graham, I said, we get a good account out of this. And he said, well, you know, I don't think we ought to do that. He said, what I would do if I were you, he never told me to. He said, I would consider either opening at First National Bank or Cobb Exchange. I said, but I'm doing all the work. He said, I know, but it's a civic thing. You don't need to use your position to take advantage. He said, you'll want them to help you. So this will kind of help them. So I went into Cobb Exchange in Knox Woods. Thought, what's he up to? He's working for Walter Graham. He's opening an account down here. Something's going on, you know. Well, that was just Mr. Graham's way of, that's the way you should do it in the community. And when we worked with Kennesaw State University, they finally moved a couple of accounts to us, and we sponsored the early bird breakfast. But Mr. Graham didn't want to advertise it, which I couldn't understand why. He said, well, all you want them to know is Roger Hopkins and Horace Sturgis to know it. That's all it needs to. We don't need to wave red flags or white flags on what we're doing, just as long as they know, but we don't want to brag too much. We just want to do what's right for the community. And he said, and we want all the banks to do well. If they do well, we'll do well. So there was a trust, because we met quarterly, the Cobb County bankers, 8 banks. We met quarterly, and we'd work on different programs, and Horace came and spoke to us, and that's how we started those banking schools up there, which have now moved to Athens.
Well, why would people, that's sort of the process stuff, why would people call you a godfather? Don't be modest. This is we ask everybody, it's the same question.
I don't know what's the definition of a godfather anyway.
Well, it's a person, everybody thinks about the movie Godfather, but really it's a person that everybody looks up to. Some may even be scared of him, but certainly they look up to him. And they're all about getting results and genuine overall perception that he's got his act together.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I know one of them, and we've already talked about, is you're great at getting people together, and the John Williams of the world know it. Mm-hmm. And that's why they put you in that category. And a lot of people, unfortunately, too many people don't know. So why do you think people put you in that list?
Well, sometimes you can, Nelson Price said, what are you, a king? You're more of a king maker than you are trying to be the king. I said, well, I don't know. I guess it started when it was after my dad died. we were talking about some of the school board members. Tom Wooten was still pretty old then, and I got to thinking about, I don't know what brought it up, but some changes with schools. I guess the Kennesaw College and all that stuff. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to recognize all the former school board members and the current ones, because they're still voters, you know. And same way with the chamber presidents we did that time, you know, because they all contributed something, like the commissioners, you know. And when we got all the former commissioners, I thought, well, that works pretty good, you know, if you get people together. You kind of highlight what they did. And if you honor good people, it just kind of turns out good, you know.
I do a lot of that too, Joe, not nearly as well as you, but I do a lot of that. When I talk to people about my role as a chamber, it's not running a program, because I don't run a program. I've got great staff that do that. But what you do, there's many times I ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the Georgia Club, because I believe strongly in getting people together. When General Harris got promoted to 3rd star, we put on a
Stacey Harris.
Yeah. Stacey Harris. We did it at the chamber. I paid for it myself because we didn't have any budget money for it. But and got hotel rooms at what's the hotel right next to the chamber? Hilton. Was it Hilton? Yeah, I think it's the Hilton Hotel. But I think it's a shame, and I'm going to be sure that you get highlighting this. It's a shame more people don't know what you did. So what would you consider your greatest accomplishments in your career? What do you think, where you had some impact, what do you consider your greatest accomplishment?
Well, I guess, you know, being involved in the Marietta community, because I'm from Mapleton and grew up there, and, you know, above average family, not wealthy or anything. And I guess with Steve Tumlin and Walter Graham and some of the directors, they were very conservative. And I checked with Harold Glover, Bob Roy's mentor. I'm sure he's mentioned him before. And I asked him about going to Marietta. What did he think about me going to work for Marietta Commercial Bank? And he said, well, I know some of those directors, and that's about as conservative a bank as you'll ever go. And said, you know, I don't. Said, you're going to be the first person doing that in the county. Nobody else does that. And he said, I don't think you go wrong with that. He said, I just think it'd be a good opportunity. I believe I would do it. So I guess kind of getting advice from the George Thompsons. And my daddy would send me to those people because he knew I'd listen to them more than I would him. So I guess so.
Well, we've already talked about the Cobb Way. Roy talked about it. If you looked up the Cobb Way in the encyclopedia, it would be you. The way people have described it, Otis White did a study for me the year I was chairman, and he said, Cobb's got something nobody else has got. Y'all get people together and work things out as opposed to fighting in public.
Yeah.
You sit down and work things out, and that's what you do, Joe. You're kind of the master of doing that. I learned a lot of doing that from you. I didn't do that as a Georgia Pop gun. Just getting people. It sounds so simple, but it's an art form.
Well, I told Kessel I had an annual report I wanted to give him because I was telling about this 100th anniversary. Of course, he's got a board meeting Thursday. I told him, you know, his former chairman was coming up, and when we did some of these lunches, you may be in some of them, but we just got hundreds of pictures that we made out of 10th anniversary. They're small ones, but Kessel's in one of his at Bill Shipp's birthday party. And it's so prominent to that he is. I could have just drawn an arrow there when they printed it and put Kessel spelling. But I had an extra one, and I gave it to him. I said, I just wanted you to know, Kessel, you made our annual report in 2017. He said, let me see it. He said, I need this. Said, we're late getting ours, so I'm already in your report before I can even get my own.
It's a great story.
Kessel stopped me at a GBA meeting last year before, and we were talking. He said, do you remember when I started my banking career with y'all? in 1982, and I was going to manage that Acres Mill branch. He came over from Augusta when Howard Gaines and Alex Fyvett was here. And he said, we were working on setting that trailer up out there, and getting started. I asked you what you did for the bank. Do you remember what you told me you did? I said, no. He said, you told me you made hard work look easy. He said, I've used that in a lot of talks. But I don't look at competitors as competitors, but you don't look at them like you're trying to do them in on anything. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Exactly. That was the way that's the way I was kind of brought up. And it still works today.
I think it does. I just hope we don't lose it as we continue to grow. You made some notes coming in. Is there something we have not hit on that you might want to say?
Well, I brought you the article on the 50th anniversary. That's kind of the Kennesaw College story there.
Okay.
That was in the paper. Oh yeah, there's one thing. Yeah, this is pretty interesting. This is somebody that's in the community. Steve Ewan bought Wade Ford from those guys back. Alan Arnold, Alan and A.C. Arnold had owned that for years, and he bought that Wade Ford, which is one of the largest minority-owned dealerships in the United States. Do you know Steve Ewan?
No, I've heard his name.
Well, anyway, I was down. They do some banking with us, and he's going to have a grand opening of that thing. And he said, "Don't tell anybody, but I think the President Ford's going to come." And so anyway, we were talking, and it was Mullally, who used to be with Boeing Aircraft. And so he said, "But don't hold, we're going to do it." And he threw some dates out. And he got talking about Henry Ford Motor Company, and how much money they'd given to different things, and big proponent of education. And I said, "Well, Henry Ford put a lot of money in Georgia in education." He said, "Where?" I said, "Berry College." He said, "Berry College? Where is that?" I said, "It's up in Rome." I said, "Matter of fact, he gave a lot of money back in the 20s, back before the Depression. Built the Ford buildings." He said, "You got to be kidding." I said, "Oh no, he spent millions of dollars up there." So anyway, then I was thinking about, the President Ford coming, and they were still doing some things up there at Berry College. They refurbished those buildings about 10 years ago and spent several $1 million. Ford Motor Company. So I got him a tour up there at Berry College to see, and we were eating lunch. And this connects back to Stancy, Georgia. We was eating lunch in the Ford living room. Steve Ewan, the president of the college, 2 or 3 of the development people and some students. And we're just sitting there, and out of the blue, Steve Ewan said, "Well, let me ask a question. How did Henry Ford meet Martha Berry?" And the president said, "I don't really know." I said, "Well, I heard in 1972, Dr. Inez Henry was doing the Stancy, Georgia tour, because that's part of the 7th District, that Mrs. Thomas Edison introduced him." And the president said, I've never heard that. I said, "I may be wrong." But a couple of weeks I did get and I made you a copy of it, a letter. And the reason I thought this was significant, this is the letter they found in archives of Martha Berry writing Mrs. Thomas Edison in November 1929. But what makes this so interesting is that a lot of your Cobb teachers were certified at Berry College before Kennesaw. Because we got a lot of them at Powder Springs that's now up in their 70s that got their education. So I think there's a connection between there and here. And so when I got on notice to do a story on Berry College and its connection to Cobb, I had to come up with somebody that was connected, that had remembered Henry Ford. So I had to go find somebody 92 years old, and that was Miss Gladys Addington, who was next door neighbor of Lloyd Cox. And I called her, and so they did the story on her with Steve Ewing as the people, because she went to the the Berry College School for Girls, and graduated in 1941, and remembered Ford coming up there. So that's how I tied it together. But I thought it was significant that this was the tie, and when I got to name a school in Cobb, which was the Pittner School, Pittner Elementary School. It's one of the closest ones to the college. Well, I went to they let me name that school. Of course, I had to go through the school board to do it. Daddy and Buck Pittner were good friends, and they worked on that Kennesaw College together. And when I went up there to the grand opening of the school, the lady said, "Well, I thought you might be interested in how that's all come around." Said most of our teachers were certified at Kennesaw State, which Mr. Pittner helped create, which was a nice tie, I thought, for 40 years. But anyway, I made you a copy of that, and I'll just
Over
give
the
you.
years, you've given me a lot of different things. We want to start backing up here. Yeah, but the Braves game's on today.
Oh, okay.
And there's the Lockheed.
Looks like
That's the
traffic
write-up
are-
the paper did on that Lockheed thing the last couple of years ago.
For right now, yeah.